Morning, everybody. Oh, there's some mornings. I'm getting some back. I'm glad to see all of you again this morning. And I want to thank everybody for the great day we had yesterday. And when you see all of those purple people running around, if you would just say thanks for all of the hard work they've done for this conference, I'd appreciate it because they've worked really hard. Today, our first featured school is Canelan High School. Canelan School District 302 is located in Maple Park, Illinois, in Kane County, which is my county. Total enrollment is 1,364 students. The low-income population is 18%. Students with disabilities are 11%, and they have 1% English language learners. Canelan School District made a commitment to student achievement that is outlined in both their mission and their long-range vision planning to graduate all of their students college, career, and community ready. With this foundation in place, Canelan High School has worked to create specific structures that support various levels, from school-level teams down to individual students, while maintaining a focus on student growth and achievement. In order to attain the goals outlined in the district long-range plans and realize outstanding student achievement, Canelan High School implemented a rigorous school improvement process. All school improvement goals are written to align with district growth goals. The mindset of using SMART goals has become a part of the culture at Canelan High School. Underlining everything is a commitment to the PLC structure, which includes protected time for teacher collaboration and frequent opportunities for professional growth. Because of the work of the staff and students at Canelan High School, the ACT performance of the class of 2014 saw record growth in the areas of math, English, science, and reading, which led to Canelan High School making AYP. The focus on essential questions and the commitment to student learning above all else are key foundational pieces that have enabled Canelan High School staff to set rigorous goals, collaboratively generate such meaningful assessments, and now effectively utilize student achievement data. The Canelan High School session, Achievement via Rigorous Goal Setting, will be held at 9:30 in Salon 4. Is there a representative from Edward Cole's Model for Excellence Learning Academy? If you are here, would you please come up on stage? I can't see, so I don't know if they're coming. Edward Cole's Model for Excellence Language Academy is a Chicago public school with a population of 550 students. 98% of the students are low income, and 12% of their students have disabilities. Edward Cole's is a progressive school serving students in grades 3 to 8. The staff at Edward Cole's believes that if you highlight student strengths, their weaknesses will disappear. To ensure students receive a quality education, they are challenged with a rigorous, differentiated instruction on a daily basis. Staff continually strives to reach and build the whole child and their family. Because the staff truly believes it takes a village to raise a child, they encourage parents to be involved through a variety of activities such as literacy and math nights. Through dedicated efforts on the staff of Edward Cole's, their students have shown continued growth over the last several years in both reading and math. The Edward Cole's Model for Excellence Language Academy session, Meets and Exceeds, will be held at 10:45 in Salon 4. Oh, here you are.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, great. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Congratulations.
Here you go. Thank you.
You're welcome. John Jay Elementary School, located in Community Consolidated District Number 59 in Mount Prospect, has gone through a significant transformation over the last 3 years. As a high-poverty school, with 60% of the 404 students categorized as English language learners, John Jay was performing significantly lower than similar schools in District 59. John Jay began by implementing the STAR plan, strategic, transformational, aligned, and results-driven. The staff attributes success to several factors. An extended day was created in order to provide additional time for student learning, and weekly staff development in the areas of teaching and learning for literacy and mathematics. Data is reviewed regularly to determine areas of growth and areas for improvement. Teachers collaborate weekly in PLC groups to share teaching strategies and learn new instructional approaches. A school-wide behavior program provides support for students based on a regular staff review of behavior data. In January 2013, John Jay Elementary received the Academic Improvement Award for the state of Illinois based on their exemplary gains in performance on the Illinois Learning Standards. The John Jay Elementary session, John Jay School Turnaround Success, will be held at 1:15 in Salon 4. I'm still a little in awe of our speaker from yesterday, and in light of our cold weather today, I can't imagine 97 days. Today, our keynote speaker is Anthony Mohammed, one of the most sought-after educational consultants in North America on the topic of school transformation. As a practitioner of nearly 20 years, Dr. Mohammed has served as a middle school teacher, assistant principal, middle school and high school principal. Dr. Mohammed's tenure as a practitioner has earned him several awards, both as a teacher and a principal. His most notable accomplishment came as principal at Levy Middle School in Southfield, Michigan, a national school of excellence where student proficiency on state assessments more than doubled in 5 years. And he was named the Michigan Middle School Principal of the Year in 2005. Dr. Mohammed and the staff at Levy use the Professional Learning Communities at Work PLC model of school improvement. As a researcher and consultant, Dr. Mohammed now works with helping schools and districts across the country eliminate the achievement gap. In addition to publishing articles in both the United States and Canada, Dr. Mohammed is a best-selling author of the books The Will to Lead and Still to Teach, Transforming Schools at Every Level, and Transforming School Culture, How to Overcome Staff Division, and is contributing author to the book The Collaborative Administrator Working Together as a Professional Learning Community. Please join me in welcoming today's keynote speaker, Dr. Anthony Mohammed.
Well, good morning. I'm going to try that again. Good morning. It's an honor and a pleasure to have the opportunity to be here before you. I'd like to congratulate the model schools for the progress that you've made. And I know that awards are nice to receive, but I'm sure the smiles that you see on your children's face, their higher levels of literacy, the college admission letters that you get a chance to see, that all of that stuff makes that hard work worth it. And I think that it's wonderful when we can celebrate one another in a forum like this, because God knows we've gotten enough criticism as a field. I think it's time that we celebrate the folks who are doing the right work as an inspiration, rather than trying to beat everybody down for not doing the work that we need to do. So I'd like to give yourselves and those model schools another round of applause. Well, it's going to be a challenge for me to stay on this stage because I like to move. But I'm very honored to be here at this very prestigious conference and to have the opportunity to speak to so many of you about the very important topic of school culture. Now, before I jump into this what I consider a very, very important topic, one that's finally getting the attention that it deserves, I would like to provide you to identify a tool that can help make today's presentation even more interactive and even better. How many people here actively tweet? Can I see a show of hands? Now, I'm a newbie to Twitter. I thought it was some stuff that my kids did. I didn't know it was such a powerful tool. I thought it was just, how much could you say in 140 characters? I was like, really? But I've had the opportunity to travel the world, and I have a chance to connect with people in the Netherlands, people in Australia, people in the Caribbean, and all across the country through this medium called Twitter. So if we have any active tweeters here today, I want to invite you to follow me and send me some feedback, ask questions, and I usually get back with people when you ask a question on Twitter or make a comment that you'd like for me to respond to. My Twitter name is @NewFrontier and the number 21. So we want to make you a part of today's presentation. I don't know if the conference has a hashtag. Does it have a hashtag? Yes, no, maybe? No? Well, we'll figure it out. If there's a hashtag for the conference, if not, we're going to create one. We're going to get up to at least the 21st century today. So maybe you're going to, here in Illinois, you're so forward thinking that we'll push you into the 22nd century. We'll create something new this week. So I'd like, in the short period of time that I have this morning, to address the issue of developing what we call school culture. And for years, there's been debates about how do we improve school. And what I found over the past 10 years, we've been really solidly entrenched in this whole school improvement journey, is that the biggest casualty of the whole school reform movement has been common sense. Is that we've tried to be so exotic, we've tried to be so empirical, that we've missed the things that are right in front of us. And today I'd like to appeal to your sense of common sense when it comes to developing school culture, because the greatest resource that you have as a school is not your data system. It's not the Common Core. It's not formative assessment. The greatest tool that you have in your school is the human being. And if we don't understand how the human being operates, we'll end up in a position like we are now, spending billions of dollars on school reform, and in many cases not seeing the needle move even an inch as it pertains to influencing people's lives so that we can continue to create and to perpetuate a great society into the next century, into the next millennium. The most important institution that we have in the entire society is the education system. And I'm looking at the most important people in the entire society. Nelson Mandela, who, as we know, just passed away, said, you know the civility of a society by how they treat their children. The condition of the children in a society says more about that society than anything else, more than their weapons, more than their economy, more than any other institution. How do we treat our children, and are they being prepared for the next century or being prepared for the society they're going to inherit? So, in that journey, my area of research over the past 8 years has been on the development of school culture. How do we cultivate the human capital, the human potential, so that we are maximizing the potential of the investment of our community, but also maximizing the students' potential who come to our school? So, here's a question I'd like to ask you, and it's not rhetorical. Have any of you over the past 5 to 7 years gotten any pressure to improve? You got an email, something, a letter. You know what that makes you? It makes you normal. And for all of the people who are a part of the upper crust of the accountability movement, who've gotten great ratings, ratings are just relative comparisons. And I really wish that we would get rid of those. We know that summative assessment is not a good way to improve productivity. But we summatively assess schools all the time. We sort, select, and rank, and then we wonder why most of the schools on the bottom don't get better, because they're placed on the continuum and compared to one another. And I'm doing some work in some states where they're actually using Z-scores to identify school accountability, which is just a measurement of how people relate according to the mean. And I'm working with a school in Kansas who was in the bottom categorization. got out of it last year. 2 years ago, they were in the bottom categorization, and they were celebrating because they got out of the bottom. They had a big celebration. Now, they were happy about that. Well, over the summer, 3 schools in the bottom closed. The state re-ranked like the BCS or some NCAA basketball ratings. 3 schools closed. They recalculated the formula, and now they're back in the bottom. They didn't do anything wrong, anything different. 3 schools closed. They renormed it, and now they're in the bottom again. Try going to that school and giving them an encouraging word about improvement when they made tangible gains, but all we were trying to do was compare one school to another. The best form of assessment that we've known for years is formative assessment, based upon a criterion reference. But all of us have been bitten by this norm reference bell curve bug. So in one way, shape, or form, all of us should want to improve. The school with the highest average ACT score in the state should want to improve, and the school with the lowest achievement in the state should have the internal need to improve. So here's a theory that was forwarded by one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, Albert Einstein. His theory was, or his statement was, insanity was doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So that means if we want a different result, we're going to have to do what? I'm going to ask that question again. If we want better results, and Einstein's theory was insanity was to do the same thing and expect a different result, what are we going to have to do? Change. Can we all admit that change is not an easy process for human beings? We agree with that? We love change for everybody else. But change is not a strategy that we necessarily embrace as human beings. We're not wired for change. And I want to give you a couple of books to give you some insight on the difficulty of change. The first book I'd like to recommend to you, and I'll probably give you 20 before I'm done. First book I'd like to recommend to you is a book called Change or Die. And Change or Die is a book written by a physician. And this physician had 6 patients that he chronicles, that he looks at their data, their x-rays, their blood pressure readings, their blood work, blood sugar levels. And he calls each one of these patients into his office for a really important face-to-face. And he said, listen, if you don't change your behavior, you're going to die. What do you think happened to all 6 of the patients that he counseled? They died. So the book is obviously not about medicine. The book is about the difficulty of the change process. And I want you to think about his thesis. If self-preservation or survival is the first law of nature, if survival or living is not enough to motivate a person to change, change is a much more complex process than what we thought. Obviously, missing AYP wouldn't be a good motivation. Obviously, missing out on a SIG grant would not be a good motivation. My grandmother, who was one of the most influential people in my life, passed away last July. She was 90 years old, and she had type 2 diabetes. And we would take her to the doctor, and the doctor would say, Mrs. Roberson, you have to stop eating this, 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 and this. My grandmother said, We would leave, and my grandmother was a bully. And she would make us stop at the grocery store, and what would she put in her basket right after leaving the doctor? Everything the doctor told her not to put in her basket. So if living doesn't motivate people to change, I think that we've made some flawed assumptions about how do we motivate and develop the human potential as it pertains to change. Second book I'd like to recommend to you is a pretty famous book that many of you may already have in your library. This book is called Drive by Daniel Pink. Drive. And Daniel Pink takes a look at the evolution of human motivation. And he said, under the old assumption, or old assumptions, he called that motivation 1.0. He said it was functional for the 19th and 20th century. But the modern human being has evolved over that period of time, and he said we needed an upgrade to motivation 2.0. And he identifies the 2 worst motivational strategies that we've documented as it pertains to the modern human being. Can anybody guess what the worst documented motivational strategy for change is? Nobody read the book? It's punishment. Punishment is by far the worst documented motivational strategy for change that we know of. In fact, punishment, if you look at it if you isolate it as a variable, there's only one real punishment, and that's pain. It's the only universal punishment is pain. Every other thing that we call a punishment has to be interpreted by the person that we're punishing as a punishment. When I was a principal and I told a student that they had an after-school detention, if they started crying, I knew it was a punishment. If I said you have an after-school detention, they said, that's it? Cool. I knew it wasn't a punishment. So here's something difficult for us to grasp as educators because we're still kind of suffering from the old Skinner model mentality. The old Pavlov, let's shock the dog into compliance. We don't even have the power to punish. Everything that we call a punishment has to be interpreted by the recipient as a punishment before it can even be a punishment. So it's hard for us to let go of that mentality. So if we look at NCLB as one of the most significant school reform movements as far as an investment over the past 50 years, what was the built-in motivational strategy for change built right into No Child Left Behind? Right? There was a strategy involved. What was it? It's punishment. We're going to set a bar called AYP that every school has to reach. And if you don't reach that bar, what was the response? They called us ugly names, published your names in the newspaper, and even in the beginning of the law, most people didn't comply. You had to send letters to your parents saying, yeah, we stink. State says we stink. Federal government says here's a letter saying that we stink, and if you don't like us, you can go somewhere else. How did that work out? University of Southern California released a report in 2011 documenting the schools that were on the failing list in 2002 when NCLB was passed. 9 years later, only 1% of the schools that were on the original failing list were off. So after billions of dollars of investment, draconian policies, we saw a 1% growth. Now, I'm not a great investor, but if I took money to my broker and I invested it for 9 years and I got a 1% return, I think I'd look for a new investment. Now, let's take a look at the flip side of this. We're trying to get people to change. The Obama administration came in 2008, took oath of office in 2009, riding a wave of change. Can anybody guess what the second worst motivational strategy for change that Pink identified? It's almost ironic. Incentives. Incentives are almost as bad as punishment because incentives require two commitments, two agreements. The person being offered the incentive, number one, has to view the incentive as valuable. Number two, the person providing the incentive has to maintain the ability to provide the incentive to keep the person motivated. As soon as the person being offered the incentive doesn't view it as valuable, or the person giving the incentive loses their ability to give it, motivation is over. And what Pink was able to identify is that incentives over time create a sense of entitlement. So we move from beating people with a stick to tying a carrot at the end of it and making them chase it. So can anybody tell me what the signature motivational strategy has been with Race to the Top? Incentives. So if we can't threaten you into change or beat you into change, we'll offer you some grant money to change your teacher evaluation system. We'll offer you a few trinkets to change certain things. And as we've seen from the latest NAEP scores and the data that we've tracked over time, that the NAEP achievement has not moved outside of the standard margin of error for 21 years. Meaning that if we were to test the kids the next day, those scores could go up 4% or down 4% with doing nothing. I think that there's enough evidence that we need to look at different methodology as it pertains to cultivating human potential. Punishment doesn't work. and incentives like merit pay have been documented very well. Doesn't work. And just a quick question before I move forward. Any of you ever read the book Freakonomics? Anybody read that book? If not, get it. I know some of you come from CPS, Chicago Public Schools. And in that book, they document Arne Duncan when he was I think they called it CEO or executive of Chicago Public Schools. And there was a provision in the contract that if teachers got certain test scores on, I think at that time they were taking the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, I can't really remember what assessment it was, that they would get a raise or they would get a bonus. Well, Mr. Duncan hired some mathematicians from MIT to come and look at algorithms, take a look at score patterns, and they weren't statistically possible. There was some manipulation. And as they did some investigation, they found that there was some direct erasures, teachers who actually gave students answers, and the conclusion was that incentives don't motivate people to do better. What they do is make them more creative when it comes to cheating. So he was the advocate for getting rid of merit pay as a motivational strategy for teachers in Chicago Public Schools. He becomes the Secretary of Education, and what's one of his signature programs or signature changes when he becomes Secretary of Education? Merit pay. That's why I said the greatest casualty of the school reform movement has been common sense. If it didn't work in Chicago, it's not going to work across the nation. So I'm done with that rant. I just wanted to make that point. Now, thank you. Now, we admit that change is difficult. As an individual, we all have certain habits. I have a slight cupcake addiction. It's hard for me to walk past some delicious cupcakes and just keep moving. I'm working on it. So if individual change, if change were easy for individuals, Nicorette wouldn't be a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's hard to change. So imagine organizational change. That's like change on steroids. It's like taking the complexity of the individual and multiplying it by every member of the organization. If you're in a high school with 150 teachers, or an elementary school with even 20 teachers, you're talking about taking the difficulty of changing one habit and multiplying it by every attitude, disposition, history, experience, all of that stuff. Now we have what I call change on steroids. When we look at organizational change, which we are charged with, there are two forms. The first form of organizational change we refer to as technical change. And technical change is very important. Technical change refers to the non-human aspects of the organization. Changing our master schedule to allow for collaborative time. Very important. That's a technical change. Changing our curriculum. Changing how we assess. Changing from a 6-period day to a block schedule. Technical change is necessary, and it's going to happen as long as we have an organization. It's going to be continuous. But the second type we refer to as cultural change. And cultural change refers to changing people's beliefs, attitudes, assumptions, and behaviors. Now, based upon your experience working in schools, which one have you found to be the most challenging, technical or cultural? Cultural is not even close. Larry Lazard, who's one of my heroes, wrote that culture eats structure for breakfast. You can change the structure all day long. If the human beings do not change to embrace that structure, we have an innate and unique ability to eat that structure for breakfast. How many of you have lived through a few structural changes in your career? Yeah. Outcomes-based, standards-based. We've had the flipped classroom now. We've had the open classroom. Who remember the open classroom? That was a great idea, wasn't it? School with no walls. We've been through a lot of technical change, and they all came from a pretty solid research base. But what didn't happen universally is that the human environment was not cultivated to embrace and use those strategies the way that they were designed. So the high school that came up and got the award I congratulate them on the progress they've made with the professional learning community model, which is a technical change, but I've seen PLC become a miserable failure, not because it's not a great strategy, it's a wonderful strategy. It wasn't the PLC that was the problem, it was the human beings who misused PLC that was the problem. So it's almost as if we've been trying to find some technique that can transcend dysfunction in the human environment. I want to give you a little advice. Stop. You can't. Until we address the culture, our structure is held hostage to the culture. Once we develop the culture, there's a whole world of technical possibility that we could embrace. Now, my latest book is called The Will to Lead and the Skill to Teach. And I co-authored this book with a brilliant pedagogical specialist named Dr. Shiraki Holly. And we had traveled the country, and when we traveled, people kept saying, you guys need to meet. Because we had what we found out to be two halves of the same whole. I was traveling the country, working on the culture. I called it the will, the learning environment, the human capital. And he was traveling the country, working on the right methodology, instructional practices, classroom environment, culturally responsive techniques. And what we found was I could work with a school and develop their culture, but if they didn't have the right techniques, from a technical standpoint, it wasn't quite effective. He was working with schools and he would give them all the right strategies, but they had a toxic culture and they couldn't take advantage of what they knew. So we found that we had two halves of the same whole. That in order to reach the level we're trying to reach as an institution, is going to take the combination of learning environment and learning activity or activities, technical and cultural connected. And we created a matrix or a rubric for people to assess where they are in this process. Now, the level that I hope, if you get a chance to come to my breakouts, I'm going to work on some skill piece. I'm going to go deeper into the will. The zone that we would like to see every school in the country aspire towards is the upper right-hand corner, which we call the high will, high skill zone. And let me describe it for you. This is a place where the educators are highly student-centered. They're collaborative. They place the need of the student at the center of the table. They're committed. They have grit. And they have the right techniques, structures, tools, and resources to ensure that every child is both academically and socially successful. Now, how many of you have children of your own? Can I see a show of hands? How many of you would love, you'd be thrilled to send your child to a school like that? Can I see a show of hands? I'm going to put up 2 hands and a foot. That is the school that we hope that we drop our child off in the morning. High will, high skill. That's the zone that we're shooting for. But there are 3 convenient no parking zones I'm going to ask you to avoid. Let's go to the upper left-hand corner. We call this the high will, low skill zone, or what I affectionately call the Kumbaya University. It's a place where students are highly nurtured, they're highly affirmed, there's a high level of empathy, but it's at the expense of academic rigor. It's at the expense of the right techniques, the right structure, pushing students to their maximum capacity academically. So we focus on the affect and neglect the academic. That's not what we're shooting for. Let's go to the bottom left-hand corner. We call this the high skill, low will zone, or what Dr. Holly and I like to refer to as the Charles Darwin Senior High School of Natural Selection. It's a place where the high school, or the school itself, prides itself on setting a very high and rigorous bar. But they don't think it's their responsibility or job to develop, nurture, or create an environment where the student is placed at the center, where they nurture the students to that bar. My children attended a high school just like that. I have 6 of them, and 5 of them did very well in that environment. And it had very little to do with what happened at school. But if you heard me, I said I had 6. Anybody have that one kid? Remember that Sesame Street skit, one of these kids is doing his own thing? Yeah. And it proved that God has a sense of humor. He's Anthony Jr. Other 5 sailed through because they got their will at home. They didn't need the teachers to cultivate them, to create an environment. They just need, show me the bar and I'll reach it. So they were taking credit for things that they didn't even develop. The parents, for the most part, did that. Well, my youngest son is, of the 6, probably the most cognitively developed. But he has this thing about not following rules that doesn't make sense to him. Anybody have a kid like that? Yeah. He could pretty much get away with this until high school. We started to see traces of it in late elementary, few glitches in middle school, but the stuff hit the fan when he hit high school. And freshman year was rough. But we said, freshman year, let him ride it out. And he did well enough to live. And if we have any parents, we know what that means. He did well enough for me not to kill him. Sophomore year, we expected the freshman jitters are over. He'll be fine. It actually got worse. So I approached the principal and the school psychologist and said, maybe there's something wrong that we're not picking up. They test him, academic and social assessments, emotional assessments. Nothing wrong with him socially or emotionally. His cognitive scores are off the charts. The psychologist said in 2 of the areas he assessed, he has never tested a kid who got a higher score in these 2 areas. In both math and reading, he's nearly at the college level as a first semester sophomore student. Called a meeting with his teachers and said, listen, here's the data. Here's the brutal facts. He's obviously learning something because I didn't teach him this. He's picking up what you're teaching. He just may not be demonstrating it in a way that you see fit. How do we compromise? Because this is a kid that could really be a world leader. So we went around the table, and can you guess what feedback we got? Started with the civics teacher. Anthony's a very bright young man. You know when they preface it with that, it's downhill from there. Anthony is a very bright young man. But we have to teach these kids to be organized and to be responsible. So in my class, we have binder checks. And there's a certain level of organization he has to have with his notes and certain material that I ask him to have. And we do binder checks once a week. And when I check, he's gotten zeros all year on the binder. I said, well, how's he doing on his assessment? So he's knocking those out of the park. I said, well, correct me if I'm wrong. When I look at the state of Michigan grade level content expectations for civics, could you show me where binder checks? Now, I appreciate your need for my son, to see my son organized, but let us take care of that. What is it in civics he's not getting? Oh, he learns the material. We went to the next person. Anthony's a very nice boy. But there's a certain group that he just gravitates towards and they talk. Okay. Went to the next person. He turns in his homework, but oftentimes the hour and the assignment number are missing from the upper right-hand corner. And I'm dead serious. And he loses points. So what made me feel like an even bigger failure is that the school used Transforming School Culture, my first book, as a staff book study the year before. So I felt like a total failure we had to pull him. Put him in a different environment that was a hybrid model, that was partially online, and he can work in a team, standard by standard, and go as fast or as slow as he wanted, and they had choice on how to demonstrate that they had mastered that standard. And mastery was the only option. He ended up graduating in 3 years. He is now in his 2nd year at Florida A&M University, and he's on the dean's list. What's my point? My point is, even in the A+ rated school, that's what my community school got, setting a high bar without developing a need to help students who are not reaching that bar is saying that there is an acceptable level of casualty. And do any of you in this audience have any disposable children? Any of you go to a cocktail party and say, you know what? 80% of my children are successful. I think your friends would look at you funny. Like you're satisfied with 3 out of 4 of your kids. 75% of my kids are doing great. Do you use percentages when you talk about your children to other people? Well, if there are no disposable children, every child that's failing in whatever school rated school has is a failure to that household. And it just wasn't an option in my household. In the school that I paid taxes to send my child to, if they were responsive with their culture, they could have done the same thing that the other school did if they had the will to do it. They had the skill, they just didn't have the will. And last and least, we call this the low will, low skill institution. Or what we would call in Detroit, I don't know if you use this term here in Illinois, in Detroit we call it a hot mess. This is a school where nobody cares and nobody knows what to do. It's just a frustration bomb. It's just failure waiting to happen. It's a depressing experience for the adults and a depressing experience for the students. What I'd like for you to do is take about 2 or 3 minutes and talk with your neighbor. If you had a coin right now, you had to place a coin on one of those 4 quadrants, which quadrant would you say best represents where you think your school is right now? And I want to give you a little insight because people start to cheat. There are no intermediate categories. It's not lukewarm will, semi-high skill. It's one of the 4, because many of you use rubrics. You don't give kids a 2.6. It's a formative assessment. Take about 2 or 3 minutes, and if on this continuum, where would you say your school was right now? Talk. All right, scholars, was attention? Now, obviously, 2 minutes is not enough to do a deep analysis. I just wanted you to do a reflection and just kind of a light analysis of where you think you are. But here's what I wanted to follow that up with. Anybody ever heard the terminology of the term, it is what it is? I don't want people to get overly anxious, overly celebratory based upon where you are right now. John Hattie wrote a book that's called The Holy Grail of Teaching by the New York Times called Visible Learning, the most comprehensive analysis of effective influencers of student learning and the most effective influencer that a teacher has. There are other factors, but the most effective strategy that a teacher can use to raise student achievement is formative assessment. It's giving students feedback on the progress that they're making compared to a standard and giving them regular and frequent feedback. John Hattie proved that by analyzing 800,000 meta-analyses on 65 million students and on 6 continents. We have become sick on summative assessment, on placing people on a ranking as if that ranking defines them. Did you know that the French psychologists that developed IQ never meant for it to be a summative assessment? It was supposed to give the teacher some data on where a kid was on a continuum so that they would know how to move that child from where they were to where they needed to go. It was never meant to be a fixed analysis of intelligence. Neither is this framework. If formative assessment works in the classroom, it works with school improvement, with organizational improvement. So no matter where you found yourself, it is what it is. Dr. Martin Luther King said something very important. He was speaking to a church and speaking to some parishioners in Birmingham, Alabama in 1967, and he asked a question. What's the first thing that has to be done when the lights go out? And the answer was acknowledgement that the lights are out. So no matter what you say, if you're Dr. Muhammad, I think that we have a very concerned staff. Our issue is in methodology, structures, the right techniques. That would be an intelligent strategic analysis. Because what you're saying is our efforts should be spent on developing the skill. Others may say, Dr. Muhammad, we have a staff that's very well trained in methodology. Our district invests a lot in collaborative time. Our teachers have a lot of data. My concern is I just don't think we care as much as we should. That would be an intelligent analysis, because that would teach you your focus should be on developing the culture. It would even be intelligent if you were honestly to say, Dr. Muhammad, we're a hot mess. I don't think we know what to do, and I think sometimes we lack concern. Whatever it is, that tells you where you need to start to improve and work, because all of us are reaching for the upper right-hand corner, high will and high skill. And I have good news for you. We know how to help any school that desires to get to that high will, high skill. There's a methodology that we've developed, and we have model schools that we've developed and are developing all over the country. 2 of this year's National Blue Ribbon schools were schools that Dr. Holly and I and our organization have worked with that have become high will, high skill schools that were in trouble several years earlier. And the book that I talked to you about earlier, The Will to Lead, the Skill to Teach, is actually almost like a manual on how to accomplish that. So we're trying to infuse some common sense back into the conversation. Let's stop ranking. Let's stop sorting and selecting, and let's identify where a school is, and let's fine-tune the development in their specific areas that they need to grow. And it's either in the culture or the techniques. And sometimes it's both. Now, my area of focus in this journey is in school culture, the will, the environment. And I'd like to, for a second, just define what we mean by school culture. School culture has been one of the most misinterpreted terms that we have. Climate and culture are a little bit different. Morale, collegiality, those are all components of culture. There was a study that was released, and I'm actually going to post it on my website shortly, by Fordham University on the Beating the Odds schools in California. And I actually contributed, I did some assessments at some of the schools that they studied. And they looked at several different variables, like teacher experience, per pupil expenditures, number of students receiving free and reduced lunch, students in special education, class size, and we isolated all of those variables and found that the effect size for things like class size, teacher experience, national board certification was so minuscule that it didn't have really much of an impact at all. Guess what one variable had the greatest, by far, impact that made the schools with similar student populations beating the odds schools as opposed to what California calls program improvement schools? I wouldn't be giving this speech if you didn't know what it was. It was school culture. So now we're producing very hard data that school culture is not fluff. It's not touchy-feely stuff. We can actually measure it, identify it, and manipulate it. Now, let me describe what we know as the standard operationalized definition of school culture. Kent Peterson, who is considered the father of school culture research, he and Terrence Deal, they've given us what we call the standard definition of school culture. This is what it is. School culture, according to Kent Peterson, is a school set of norms, values, and beliefs, rituals and ceremonies, symbols and stories, that makes up what he describes as the persona of the school. So school culture is not just our morale, it's not just our belief systems, it's not just our common values, it's all of that stuff wrapped into one, called the persona of the school. Let me give you an analogy that hopefully will simplify this for you, because when we really break it down, it's pretty complex. It's really the intersection of 6 disciplines: anthropology, sociology, psychology, history, political science, and economics all rolled into one. Now, how many school leaders do we have here? You had no clue when you accepted this job you had to be an anthropologist, a sociologist, a psychologist, an historian, a politician, and an economist all rolled into one. So when we look at this issue of school culture, when we really break it down, it's really the convergence of a lot of different disciplines that make up what Peterson describes as the persona of the school. I want to simplify that for you with an analogy. How many of you in this ballroom have a garden? We have any gardeners here? How important is soil to your garden? Gardeners, speak up. How important is it? Very important. I want you to think of culture like soil and technical change like seeds. If you venture to the farmer's market and you bought the best seeds that money can buy, the best tomato seed, organic tomato seed, and you brought that seed back to your garden and you planted that seed in soil that was dry, acidic, and uncultivated, what would you expect to happen to that seed? It probably wouldn't germinate. It probably wouldn't grow. And if it did germinate, it would probably give you some mutated version of what you expected. You say, oh, this doesn't look like the tomato on the package. Ugh. If you took that same exact seed and planted it in soil that was hydrated, minerally rich, and properly cultivated and developed, what would be your expectation of the exact same seed? It would grow, flourish, and give you the produce that you expect, maybe even more. Here's a question. I know we have regional superintendents here, and maybe you can deliver this message to the legislature in Illinois. I got the chance to deliver it to the legislature in Michigan about 3 months ago. If we're really concerned about school development, why have we made such a heavy investment in the seed and little to no investment in the soil? It's almost as if we're trying to find some magic system, like Jack's Magic Beans, that can transcend the dysfunction of human behavior. We just can't. You can't separate the artisan from the tool. So giving people better tools in an environment where they don't embrace it or there's no organizational synergy is to doom that investment to no return. So what I want to cover with you in the last 30 minutes is what do we know about developing that? Because we know a lot about developing activities, structures, methodology. I think that it would be worth the price of admission to figure out how to help people who are mean, adversarial, and contentious to be more productive. How many of you like to know how to do that? Wouldn't that be cool? Well, I want to give you a little bit of insight on that. Now, I've had the opportunity to date to study over 400 schools worldwide, and I found that there are some very important parts of the organization that develop or hinder the development of culture. Let's start with teachers. You've been working in school for years. Do teachers have an impact on the school culture, yes or no? Absolutely. What about the behavior of the site leadership? Principal, assistant principal, deans, the school leadership team. Do they have an impact on the persona of the school? Absolutely. What about the policies, the procedures, and practices of district office? The budgets that they create, the policies, do they have an impact? Absolutely. What about the people in Springfield? Do they have an impact on school culture? Absolutely. All 4 impact school culture, but not equally. What we found is that the greatest influencer of school culture from a singular angle is site leadership. That when you have a strong site leader who knows how to build culture, They can transcend dysfunction at the district office. They can transcend dysfunction at the state office, and they can even take a group of contentious, adversarial teachers and help them to become more productive. What we found was if you have dysfunction at the site leadership office, it's very difficult for the other parts of the organization to be as effective as they should be. Now, I wouldn't even call teachers 2. I call it 1 and 1A. We found that site leadership has a slight edge on influence to teachers, but teachers are nearly as influential. So what does that mean? The most important cultural relationship in the entire organization, professionally, is the relationship between the main office and the classroom. I call that relationship in my literature the connection of the managerial and the collegial culture at each site. Now, there are decisions that site leaders make on a daily basis that influence the behavior of teachers. And if it's not being done properly, it has an adverse effect on the teacher's culture. But how many teachers do we have here? Can I see a show of hands? There is influence that you have on the culture. Many scholars would call this the informal culture. I'll call it the collegial culture. Let me give you an example. Let's say this fine group of educators are teachers of mine, and I'm their leader. And they're having a parking lot meeting. I leave my office and walk towards my vehicle. What happens to their parking lot meeting as I approach? Stops, subject changes, they scatter. As a leader, you don't get access to the collegial culture. You don't get a chance to see how your leadership influences the people that you lead in the deepest, darkest parts of the organization. This is what I want to say to teachers. So I'm going to give both parties a mirror to look in. There's a mirror that your leaders need to look in. But there's a responsibility that you have. And I want to get into some of the traditions we've developed in our field to actually cultivate toxicity in the informal culture. And I want to give you a little insight on that. We have become complaining addicts. I'm going to break down complaining in a little bit. I want to say there are things that your leaders should do better. I'm going to lay it out for you in a little bit. I'm in total agreement. But I want to give you some insight when you gravitate towards other people to vent and validate your point. You are creating an environment where progress is going to be very difficult to make because pessimism is being cultivated. So that makes the person doing the complaining almost as guilty as the person that they're accusing. If we can fix this relationship, it really doesn't make much difference what the superintendent does. It won't make much difference what the lawmakers in Springfield or Washington, D.C. do. The most important cultural relationship in the entire organization is between the site leadership and the teachers. These are the two entities closest to the learning process. They are in the best position to develop the environment. Now, for those of you who are feverishly writing, you can relax. This PowerPoint is on my website. So I'm going to give you my web address when I leave, and you can download this and use it as you. But if you decide to do that, it's under the Resources tab. Please circle this slide if you download it. This is a picture of what a high-will school looks like. Dr. Peterson calls it a healthy school culture. And what does it look like? A healthy school culture is a place where the educators in that school develop a belief. So we're going to start with belief. And what is the belief of a healthy school culture? They have an unwavering belief that every student that they serve can be highly successful. And they articulate that belief to others in overt and covert ways. Let me take just a second to back up, because some people may be saying, Dr. Muhammad, that sounds like fluff. Do we have any sports fans here? Any sports fans? Any coaches? Who coaches a sport? Can I see a show? Who coaches sport? What sport do you coach? Track. You would pick an individual sport. I would. But let's say a relay, for instance. Okay? Have you ever seen a relay? Do you call those boys or girls? Both. Have you ever seen a group of talented girls, relay team, lose to a group of other girls with less talent because they lack confidence? You ever seen it happen before? I live in Detroit. We see it every Sunday. They're called the Lions. Talent alone is not enough to make a group of people productive. If they don't believe that they can be successful, it has a direct and profound impact on the quality of their behavior and their productivity. So, if we don't develop belief, people don't become creative. They don't think outside of the box. They don't develop a level of grit and a level of commitment. When you have that belief and you build tradition around that belief, the impossible seems possible at that point. So you can take a group of talented individuals who have a low level of confidence, and they can be beaten by people with less talent and more confidence. What I find when I work with a lot of schools who've been beaten down by the summative assessment scale is they've lost their confidence. They start to make certain things synonymous with underachievement, like student poverty. And I want to say this. I wish we'd stop calling kids poor. Kids don't work. They live in an impoverished environment. Their parents are poor, and it trickles down to them. Kids aren't wage earners. And to define that child by how much money their parents make, we're making their parents' income synonymous with our belief and expectation. I have people call me all the time to come work with their district, and they really don't know how their own personal socialization makes them sound. I'll get people to call me and say, Dr. Muhammad, we really would like to have you come work with our district because our demographics have changed. And I say, what does that mean? Well, we have more ELLs. Well, the first American schools were devoted to develop English language. They were on the eastern seaboard of the United States, but the language was Polish, Russian, Greek, Italian. English language learning is not a new phenomenon in American public school. Look at all of the people here whose parents didn't speak English or grandparents. Why is it such a big deal now? We've always had poverty. That's not new. There's always been minorities. And I'd ask, are you making the pigmentation in the student's skin synonymous with your expectation of their learning outcomes? We're concerned our African American population has grown. So, when I was doing my dissertation, I never stopped to look at my ethnicity. Anybody think like that? Like, man, I shouldn't be doing this. I can block the UV rays of the sun, my God. I don't need suntan lotion when I go out. Oh my God. It's not the student, it's our lens. I'll get to that in my breakout called Elephants in the Room. So in order to be a healthy culture, we have to deal with the impediments that people bring psychologically and sociologically to the table. The second we start making student achievement synonymous with certain social traits, we have not developed an unwavering belief that every student can be successful. We've already undermined our ability to be as creative and innovative as we should be. So we have to deal with those elephants. Let's go to the second one. Peterson writes that that's not enough, that we have to also develop policies, procedures, and practices that align with what we say we believe. What do we call it in our society when a person says they believe one thing, but their behavior is contradictory? What do we call that? Hypocrisy. We don't want to be charged with being hypocrites. So if we ascribe to this egalitarian mindset that we perpetuated, no child left behind, okay, then our behaviors should match what we say we believe. So that means we have to deal with things like grading. We have to deal with things like intervention. We have to deal with things like pedagogy and instruction. Our behaviors align with our belief, and when we get both, this is an environment where children can thrive. What I found in now studying over 400 schools is that a healthy culture has certain habits that are developed and cultivated over time. 3 in particular that are very important. First and foremost, they address the elephants in the room. They are not afraid to have crucial conversations. Are we making students with disabilities synonymous with low expectations? Are we making ethnicity? Are we making income? Who are we? What are we trying to accomplish? And what are our commitments to that goal? And this is difficult for us for this reason, because for years we have been entrusted to be individuals. When I started as a teacher, I taught in a school with 61 other teachers. I was never taught to be concerned with those other 61 teachers were doing. I was my own independent contractor. So I had my beliefs, my commitments, my methodology. To be a healthy culture, we have to move from a me mentality to a we mentality. And that's a process that has to happen. And people don't resist it because they're bad people. Many of us have never experienced schools actually operating like an organization. We've operated, like Alfie Kohn described, as a conglomeration of one-room schoolhouses. We were a collection of talent rather than a team. That's the first key step in commitment of a healthy school culture. Next, a healthy school culture is very reflective in nature. If we are clear on our commitments and what we're trying to accomplish, would it make sense to collect feedback on our progress on a regular basis? Let me give you an example. How many of you make New Year's resolutions? According to USA Today, what's the #1 New Year's resolution of American citizens? Lose weight. So you lie to yourself every year too, right? Sounds like a great idea when you're drunk on New Year's Eve. So let's say New Year's Eve, I say I'm going to lose 15 pounds by May 1st. I have declared my commitment. My goal is clear. But is that enough to accomplish it? No. Defining it is the first step. Now I have to actually go through a process to help accomplish that. I'm going to have to change my eating habits. I'm going to have to change my fitness habits. And let's say, I want to ask you, does it make sense that along the way between January 1st and May 1st, should I collect some data on my progress? Does that make sense? What will be a good instrument to use to check my progress towards my goal? Scale. So let's say it's February 15th. I'm 6 weeks into it. I think I've made some progress, but I don't have any feedback yet. It's weigh-in time. Step on the scale, and the scales told me I've lost a ½ pound. Does it sound like a progressive strategy to attack the scale? Stupid scale. Bam! I keep buying scales so it tells me what I want to hear. Does that sound like a good strategy? No. Healthy cultures don't view feedback or data as condemnation. They view it as information. How do you think a toxic culture responds when they get feedback that doesn't fit their perception about themselves? They attack the scale. Here's the fair thing. I'm not a huge advocate of over-testing, but here's the fair thing about state testing. Everybody in the state has to take it. It's not like they isolated one school and said, you take the test. That data is what it is. And I was working with a school that was in a persistently lowest achieving schools list, and they spent the whole day I was there attacking the validity of the assessment. I said, listen, everybody in the state took this test. And for students in 7th grade, your students are in the bottom 5%. You can attack the validity of that test all day long. Will that help your students learn more? It will probably be intelligent to analyze what the test told you. Identify the specific areas where your students are weak and use your energy to collaborate, change your behavior, and manipulate and move that data along. Healthy cultures don't attack feedback. Healthy cultures use feedback, good or bad, to help them grow towards their commitment. So they move from what I call being reflective to being prescriptive. It's a beautiful thing. It's gorgeous to behold. A group of focused professionals who are clear on what they're trying to accomplish, they collaborate together, look at feedback, and then collectively make adjustments based upon that feedback to move their team, their department, their school, their district forward. In this environment, Common Core will be a home run. In this environment, PLC will be a home run. What we do when we work with schools is to help schools develop those habits. Now, on the flip side, there's a culture we're trying to eliminate. So if you print this, I want you to put an X through this one. Don't deface it, just put a little X through it to say this is what we're trying to avoid. This is the school reform graveyard. It's called a toxic school culture. And what does it look like? It's a place where the educators believe that student success is possible, but it's based upon some very rigid prerequisites. And some of those prerequisites are students' attentiveness, background knowledge, willingness to comply, among others. How many of you in this audience have some kids, a few kids who don't care, who don't comply, who don't have background knowledge, and don't do what they're told? Can I see a show of hands? So what message does a toxic culture, if that's their belief, that student progress is based upon things that happen before the kid gets to school, what do you think the message that that school sends to the students would be? That your success or failure has everything to do with what happened to you before you got here. The student becomes the scapegoat. If they're attentive, if they have background knowledge, if they comply, they get the grand prize called an education. If they don't come with those qualities, in a toxic culture, they don't think it's their responsibility to cultivate them. So, I am a student of organizational theory. I'm a geek. I love it. Organizational theorists don't agree upon a whole lot, but here's one thing, one staple that organizational theorists agree upon. The only reason that an organization exists is to solve a problem or set of specific problems. Is it problematic when kids don't care? Absolutely. Is it problematic when you don't get support from home? Absolutely. It's not the problem that determines whether a school is healthy or toxic. It's the school's response when a problem arises. So how do you think a healthy culture will respond to kids who don't come in or don't walk in the door with these qualities already developed? They would become reflective and prescriptive. Give us some feedback on it, and let's strategize on what we do about to improve attentiveness, to build background knowledge, to ensure that homework is meaningful and that students are compliant. They would take the improvement within their locus of control. How does a toxic culture respond to the exact same thing? They become what I describe as descriptive and deflective. When problems arise in a toxic culture, here is their reflex. Their reflex is to describe the problem over and over again and find other people to blame. Let me ask you a question. Any of you work with people who find new and creative ways to complain about the same thing over and over again? That is a habit of a toxic culture. My work is not about good versus evil, right versus wrong. My work is about productive organizational behavior versus unproductive. That's what my work is about. I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that people in a healthy culture are good people and that people in a toxic culture are bad people. I am not that smart, and I'm not qualified to make that statement. But what I can say with great confidence and can back it empirically is that the habits and behaviors of a healthy culture are more productive than the habits and cultures of a toxic culture. When faced with a dilemma, would you be more productive reflecting on the nature of the problem and working with your colleagues strategically to solve it, or would it be more productive to complain about it over and over again and find other people to blame? One set of habits are productive, the other set is regressive. Now, in the journey to develop a healthy culture, how do we help a toxic culture become healthy? And that's where my work comes in. How do we transform the culture? There has to be a balance of two principles that create the right atmospheric conditions. And those two principles are support and accountability. What we've discovered is that when these two principles are out of balance, it creates the atmospheric conditions that are ripe for a toxic culture. Toxic cultures are actually developed over time. They just don't happen in a vacuum. They're a culmination of a lot of different events, a lot of different belief systems that crest in what we call a toxic school culture. You want to develop a healthy culture? We have to balance these two principles, support and accountability. Now, what becomes the catalyst of a toxic culture? The catalyst of a toxic culture is a variable called frustration. We can actually, in an audit, measure a school's level of frustration on a scale of 1 to 10. And we can prove that the higher your organizational frustration, the lower the level of productivity. Can we all admit and agree that frustration is not our most productive psychological state? Anybody get pumped up when you get frustrated? So, man, I can't wait to get frustrated. I'm going to really knock it out of the park. What is frustration? According to Webster, frustration is defined as a feeling of anxiety as the result of the inability to accomplish a task. Frustration is the distance between where I am and where I plan to be. That's frustration. So later on this evening, I have a goal in mind. It's to make it to the Midway airport before my flight takes off. If because of traffic or, because there's always traffic here in Chicago, if because of traffic or the vehicle breaks down or what have you, road conditions, I miss my flight, what would you expect my natural response to be? I'd get a little bit what? Does that make me a bad consultant? Does that make me a bad educator? So I want to put you at ease. Frustration is natural and it makes you human. It's not the frustration itself that can lead to toxicity. It's our response to frustration. Let's dive into sociology a little bit as I start to wrap this up. Let's look at natural migratory patterns in a sociological environment. What is the natural pattern of an individual, a human being, in an organizational environment when he or she becomes highly frustrated? How do human beings tend to migrate? Towards other people who share their common frustration. So, if I'm frustrated, I seek out other people who are frustrated, and we start to form toxic subcultures, cliques, as some might call them. And we start to fracture the organization. Here's an analogy or a representation of the worst cultures I've studied. They're like two kindergartners in timeout. The school administrators are in one corner pouting, pointing fingers at the teachers who are in the other corner pouting, pointing fingers at the administrators. I go interview the administrators and I'd ask, why are you so angry, adversarial, and combative with your teachers? They give me 10 indictments on the teachers. They're not embracing the Common Core. They send too many kids to the office. They're always complaining. I go do some investigation, and guess what I discover? All of those accusations had some merit. The teachers were just as flawed as the administrators said they were. I go interview teachers, and I say, teachers, why are you so angry, adversarial, and combative with your administrators? They give me 10 indictments on the administrator. She's a poor communicator. She's always gone to those doggone conferences in St. Charles. I send kids to the office and they come back 3 minutes later with a smile on their face and a lollipop. I go investigate and guess what I discover? The administration was just as flawed as the teachers said they were. Both parties were spending so much time describing the faults of others and associating responsibility, but guess what they missed? They missed an opportunity to reflect on their own behavior and work collaboratively to solve the problem. I'd like to challenge you on this. And my challenge would be to make a personal commitment as you leave here. if you truly desire to develop your human environment, here's a commitment that has to be made in a healthy culture. You have to turn your window into a mirror. It's easy to look outside of a transparent piece of glass and describe everything that you see that's flawed on the other side of the glass. It takes no discipline. It takes no commitment. It's easy. You know what's much more difficult? To turn that transparent piece of glass into a reflective piece of glass and put ourselves under the same scrutiny we put other people under. We have to go against our own natural inclination to make ourselves feel justified by being self-reflective rather than deflective. And if both parties would recognize that they have both equally contributed to the dysfunction of the culture because of the improper usage or coping mechanisms for frustration, if they would recognize that, they could become reflective and prescriptive rather than descriptive and deflective. Now, I want to close with this. Administrators, I want to give you a mirror to look in for a minute. And teachers, I want to give you a mirror and put you on the first steps to developing a healthy culture. Where are my administrators at? Can I see a show of hands? Administrators, as I've had the opportunity to travel the country and the world, it's amazing that we have any healthy cultures at all. We basically set teachers up for frustration walking into the door. If we look at our behavior as an organization, as it relates to school culture, our organizational structure and behavior actually cultivates toxic culture. In my book, The Will to Lead, The Skill to Teach, I outline what I call the recipe for disaster. I really empathize with the position teachers are put in. Let me walk you through this recipe real quick. Let's start with the first ingredient, inappropriate preparation. I don't care what university you attend, how much you love your alma mater. Can we agree that there is no teacher preparation program that we know that could have totally prepared you for the job that you were asked to do? Can I see a show of hands? Would you agree with that? Absolutely. I went to Michigan State University. Very highly rated teacher ed program. When I was at Michigan State, I didn't have combative parent 312. I didn't have ever-changing curriculum 419. Budget cut 216. There were things I was never prepared for. And let me tell you what happens in a traditional culture. We'll take that brand new teacher who barely passed the state certification exam, and we'll place her right next door to the queen of chemistry, who's been teaching chemistry for 34 years, has 2 master's degrees, an ed specialist degree, and has been the 3-time district science teacher of the year, and she doesn't share her stuff with anybody. And somebody had the bright idea to create a teacher evaluation system that would expect that new teacher to statistically produce at the same level as a 34-year veteran who doesn't share. Let me add one more to it. When we look at the class roles of the queen of chemistry and the first-year chemistry teacher from Northern Illinois, who's on the class roll of the 34-year veteran? All the kids don't even need a teacher. You can leave them a note and a YouTube video and they're good. Some Bill Nye videos. Who does the first-year teacher get? All the kids who failed chemistry 4 times. Then we wonder why we have a 50% turnover rate. We take people who walk into our profession enthusiastic and we put them in a position to make them almost guarantee their frustration. They didn't walk in like that. That was nurtured when they got here. Let's go to the second ingredient. Poor support systems. The NEA and AFT have been studying for years how unrefined school mentoring systems are. So not only do we put that teacher in a bad position, do we have a support system to help her or even a veteran that's struggling? Last but not least, task overload. We give them too many complex things to do. Now I want you to use your intellect. What do you expect to happen to a person who's underprepared, undersupported, and you give them too many things to do? What might you expect might happen to them emotionally? they might get a little bit frustrated. And they're going to gravitate towards other people to make themselves feel better about what they're frustrated by. So we're coming back from district office saying, the state said this, the state said that, we have to do this. And they're saying, my God, I can't even handle what I have right now. And they're going to gravitate to other people in the collegial culture, which makes your leadership almost useless because we haven't developed the culture to do what we plan to do. Teachers, I'm going to close with this because I'm not going to let you off the hook. There's a role that you play. Complaining is a coping mechanism that people employ when they're frustrated. I want you to look at the word complaint. It literally translates into co-plaintiff, meaning you can't complain by yourself. You have to go find another person with the same grievance. And two people with the same grievance, their language is called complaining. And complaining has become such a staple in our profession that we even designate in most schools an entire physical space devoted solely to complaining. What's that place called? And if you had a mentor worth anything, what's the first place your mentor told you to avoid? That's how we respond to frustration, is to gravitate towards other people and almost simulate the worst reality show you could ever watch. In my book, The Will to Lead, The Skill to Teach, I do a comprehensive literature review of all of the important studies over the last 50 years on the connection between complaining and productivity in an organization. Guess what every study proved? The more people complained, what happened to productivity? So your grievance is legitimate. It's the methodology that makes you an equal culprit to the people you're frustrated with. So, why do people complain? I'm going to wrap it up with this. Called the 2 V's. The first V stands for venting. Ventilation is natural. But when people vent on a regular basis, what develops is an air of pessimism. It's like using your colleague like a human trash receptacle. What happens to garbage over time that's not attended to? It starts to stink. It starts to create bacteria, disease, attract vermin. It will be what we call toxic. So 2 people who vent on a regular basis create an environment where even the best strategies can't penetrate because the last nail in the coffin to culture is pessimism. You shoot down an idea before you can even consider it because we've used each other like human trash receptacles. The second V stands for validation. Sigmund Freud proved that the human being has a part of our psyche called the ego. It protects our self-worth. So if I'm having problems with my 5th period class, what becomes my motivation to seek 10 other people who have the same problem? It validates that the problem isn't me. It must be bigger than me. It's almost like a citation for a research paper. The more citations you can find, the more valid the point. So if in one corner we have principals and administrators who are pouting because teachers aren't responsive, teachers are in that corner complaining because the administration isn't responsive, we end up with 2 kindergartners pointing fingers at each other, and who becomes the casualty of this environment? The students. What I'm going to hope to do a little bit of in a breakout is to start to identify what it's going to take to get us out of the corner, into the center of the room together, to do what I call put our big boy and big girl pants on. Stop playing games with each other. Our children's future is too important. How do we develop a culture that produces an environment where the research-based strategy we know that will work have a fighting chance to be implemented in the fashion that they were designed? So I hope I added a little bit to the conversation. I want to thank you for having me. Thanks you for inviting me. In the breakouts, I'll go a little bit deeper. God bless you. Best of luck, Illinois.
Thank you for being with us this morning. I don't know about you, but I was thinking about how much I complained in the last week. So thank you. Indeed, do check the breakout sessions that are in your program book. They will be in Salon too. So, and also Dr. Mohammed will be signing books at 12:30 here in the Mega Center. Don't forget to drop in your basket tickets on your way out. So we have 9 baskets to give away at lunchtime today, and be sure to check out the exhibitors and speak with them and get some ideas on things that can help you in your work. Thank you. Enjoy the morning, and we'll see you at lunchtime.